forms. It just still, the easiest way to retain state is to not reload the page. What are SPAs made of? So usually this is one way to look at it. Of course, there could be other ways, but usually we intercept navigations, be it clicking a link or submitting a form. And we then route whatever the navigation is to new content, to new page, to some sort of thing that the server is going to do with submitting a form. We render the new state. We decide what is the markup, what is the HTML for the new state. And an important bit is that we merge it with the old state. This way, this is particular to SPAs. We somehow figure out a way to make it so that not the whole page is replaced, but just a little bit of it, or hopefully the minimal amount of it possible. What makes it second class in the web platform? So if we look at all those stages, when we intercept the navigation, we now have the navigation API to make this a little bit easier, but navigation API is still low-ish level. And still a lot of firmware code is needed to use it effectively. Everything else is done in framework code. The routing, the rendering, and the merging. And so the web platform is a bit agnostic to all of this, and it's all done in userland. Is that bad? I like to think about it not as bad, but in a more diplomatic term of missed opportunities. One of them is performance. We just serve more JavaScript to do all those things. Another that I think is a big one is user agency. When everything is in userland JavaScript, the browser doesn't have, which is the user agent, doesn't have any say in it. For example, extensions that can improve accessibility, translation, and experience cannot hook into all that unless they know the framework or somehow have some entry point into that. We also, the browser UI doesn't have any say in this, and we can't do anything interesting there. The third one is what I started with, is dev complexity. You need all those tools to generate all this JavaScript and to do it right, and you have to constantly upgrade it and deal with compatibility between tools. This leads to the next one, which is lock-in. There was just recently a blog post from the 11T folks about how several things inside Next.js would only work with Vercel, etc. Now, this is not a dunk on anybody who's writing frameworks. These are really difficult to write, and people are doing amazing things there. But still, this is something developers experience, where they go the framework route and then they're also locked in with particular vendors. The other one is cost of opinion. When you go with something that has a lot of userland code and it's like does everything for you, you're also are more and more locked into how it is built. Now we talked about Next.js. There are several JavaScript first frameworks, or how I call them, or other people call them, Angular, Next and Vue, Svelte and Svelte Kits, Solid and Solid Start, React and Next.js. Yeah. Usually in JavaScript frameworks, you have an intercept element, like a link element or something like that, that says that this particular link is intercepted by the framework. You have a route inside the framework, something that turns a URL into some sort of JavaScript state. Then the render phase turns the state into a component. Those components are usually, they get their own color because they are the pinnacle of the centerpiece of a framework is how it deals with components. There's usually how you manage your code and how you turn state into markup of some sort. And each framework has its own implementation of how it merges a new desired DOM with the old DOM. The most famous one is a virtual DOM for React, which has very clever ways of doing this. On the other side, we have the emerging HTML-first SPA frameworks like Astro, HTMX, and the TurboWire. And now, those are not similar to each other and don't solve exactly the same thing. And maybe they're not exactly frameworks either. It's kind of difficult to say. For example, HTMX deals with the intercept phase by supercharging forms, adding more attributes to forms, saying this form is going to not replace the whole document, but it's only going to replace this other element. So it lets you have this kind of like form experience, form UI that only changes part of the document. But it doesn't have components. It doesn't deal with SPA in that sense. Routing, those frameworks don't usually deal so much with routing. Maybe Astro does a bit. And rendering is mostly server-side in HTML frameworks. Merge is interesting. Hotwire and Astro that uses it, what it does is something called partial iteration, or islands, where the whole body is replaced, but the document stays alive, and then you pick and choose part of your document that are not replaced, but are rather kept and just merged in some sort of way. And I'm being simplistic about this, how this whole thing works, but it's a short session. Why are JavaScript frameworks more popular than HTML-first frameworks? Yeah, all the answers I give here, by the way, are very, clear, but they're not necessarily correct. It's just a way to have a conversation started. And well, JavaScript frameworks are component-based, and because they're JavaScript first, they're isomorphic, means that you can use the same code on the client and on the server. They deal with actually generating your HTML out of your state. They handle everything. Yeah, when you handle everything, JavaScript, HTML, CSS, separately, it's messy. And when you say, okay, I pick one, JS first, it's less messy. I see people complaining on the web, for example, about how hard it is to delete CSS. Because there's no tree shaking to it. It's like somehow amorphically tied to how your DOM is built, etc. You don't know when you can delete what. So by keeping everything JS first, with large web projects, people find it to be a lot more organized. I can see the point in that. I think this is this and the fact that they are isomorphic and deal with everything is a part of why they're so popular in more than HTML frameworks. And HTML-first frameworks address only part of the SPA lifecycle. They usually mix and match with other solutions. Like Astro, usually you would have it work together with TurboWire. And HTMX doesn't render components, and you mix and match it with, I don't know what, either Astro or PHP or something that renders your HTML. There are usually solutions to part of the problem. Should the browser compete with frameworks? I think that's a question that's not going to get us very far. So instead, I'll ask a different one. What value can built-in SPA support add to users and to web developers? So I identified 3 areas where if we had some sort of built-in support for SPAs in the browser, we can add value that userland SPAs may be more difficult for them to add. And maybe this could be value to users. One of them is integration with browser UI around life cycles of browser UI, things like autofill, just as an example. Things of how the browser behaves around paint holding, and this whole concept of what the UI while you're navigating is, and how this all ties together rather than being an in-page thing. Performance, can we do things around prefetching, pre-rendering, streaming the document, metrics, that we can't do by just having a blob of JavaScript that does this. Other one is CSS. Can we have we can have more declarative things that happen in an SPA, like using the declarative view transition we have in MPA, have it inside a document, or reflect loading states. And this is an initial thinking, and a big question is this enough to warrant having something like SPA support in the browser? I don't have answers, but this is the beginning of the conversation. Have we done something like this before? Things that I get inspiration from, query selector all promise that existed. Query selected all existed in a very similar form in jQuery before it was ported into the browser, and produced a lot of value for not having to load all this JavaScript. Promises, when they just came out, they didn't add a lot of value on top of what Bluebird and Promise libraries already added. But as time went by, we had async await on top of them, and other things, and other things, and other things. And web APIs could be promises, etc. Observable, it's coming now. An example I really like is how features from SAS were gradually ported into modern CSS, and people didn't need a lot of those tools as time went by. It doesn't mean that it competes with SAS, but rather it changes the role of SAS into something that is part of the toolkit in a different way, and not always necessary. So what are we exploring in the very, very, very early stages? I keep forgetting if it's called TurboWire or Hotwire. Sorry, it's 10 p.m. here. Anyway, declarative routing. Can we decide that some routes in our application can be merged in a very simple way, like TurboWire, where we replace the body with some islands, etc. Can we do something around supercharged forms, like add more things to forms like HTMX? Maybe not the whole vocabulary of HTMX, that allows you to use the form declarative UI to change things in the document without reloading it. And explore the unique value from the previous slides around performance, browser UI, and CSS. What do you think? Thanks.
Do you have examples of what you think such a thing would look like, or
I think that the best answer I can give right now is just being inspired by those frameworks. So one thing that we're thinking about is to say that a particular set of URL patterns does not reload the page, but rather has some sort of semantics for replacing just the body or just parts. And we have to explore if serving the whole HTML and replacing just the body and merging the head like TurboWire is enough, or we need something more elaborate than that. With the supercharged form, it looks a bit like HTMX, where you can say that the form only replaces an element, the internals of one element rather than of the whole document. But still, this is very, very early thinking, this whole thing.
Your slide about JS being like the one that encapsulates like combining into all of things, like the less messy one.
Yeah.
Is there like, this got me thinking that like, could we make it so that HTML is the least messy? Like something like HTML modules, or like that older proposal of like, which, yeah, duck when I say that, I guess, maybe, but like HTML modules is a concept of the containing function that contains the HTML, JS, and CSS that I need to do a thing, like might tie in there interestingly.
Yeah, it's an interesting thought. Add it to the notes, and
Or we can make JS more messy. That's what
We could have WASM. Plus WASM there too, right?
well, there's lots of interesting stage 2, stage 3 proposals. I'm sure it's coming.
So there's a famous diagram from many years back. I tried to join the presentation to show it, but maybe folks have seen it. It says separation of concerns, and on the left you have like JavaScript and CSS and HTML, and that's how you separate concerns.
Right.
But the way modern developers separate concerns is you have a button component and a date picker component and a modal component, and all the CSS and HTML and JavaScript for that component are one concern, and they're bundled together. So I don't know that JavaScript first necessarily, like to the point that components are often defined with JavaScript, that is true, but you have JSX inline, or you have custom template semantics where you have HTML inline. So it's really about having a file with a component that could be embedded, and that's kind of more the way I think developers think about it. Still, those three technologies are still used by everyone, and the vocabulary is still expressed in those three.
Sure.
That was kind of the idea around HTML modules, is like I can have a button.html file, and then that has scripts and it has CSS, and then I can write in JavaScript to import my button and then apply it to somewhere. That was sort of the whole way we talked about it, was that, yeah, people want to write components like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, but that really seems like a discoverability nightmare. Like,
Say more?
like from a discoverability perspective, web performance and resource discoverability, this would create waterfalls of waterfalls of waterfalls.
And so does JS. So do JavaScript modules, but that's why you have bundlers, so it doesn't really matter to the developer. Like, this is a philosophical, like.
Yeah. Yeah, and then yeah, so you're basically saying HTML modules will be bundled similarly to, like, we would need a build step in order to
Yeah, the output of the build
production
step, yes.
ready.
Like most,
So why do you need browser support for any of this?
yeah, I don't know that you don't, but the output of many of these frameworks is HTML first when it's built at compile time or server rendered for like SSR. And so like the majority of the payload still comes down in that form.
Sure, but what I'm saying, like, if you want an authoring tool that maintains the component as a separate file with HTML modules and whatever, you need the authoring tool to support HTML modules. You don't need the browser to support them.
Yeah, I think there are authoring tools like that also. They're not very popular again, but there are some like I think there's an HTML-C tool from 11t that is like
It's called a WebC.
WebC. Yeah, that kind of works like that, where you bundle, you have your separation of concern, and it's bundled together. But still, I think that the JS first is also because the bundler world around JS first is a lot more evolved than anything else. Yeah.
You hinted at it, Noam. Astro is famously an MPA first framework, server side. It does have the component model to make it ergonomic for developers, but it's entirely server rendered. They try to statically build as much as possible and lazily hydrate as much as possible. But they experimented with view transitions back when they were same document only. So they quickly hacked in a client-side router and did this morphing type of strategy in a way to play with view transitions. So the developer did nothing. They didn't change a single line in their app initially. You had the same component model, the same site authoring experience, and then you would just say, I want to view transition, and the framework would just do the client morphing type thing. Since then, now we have cross-document transitions, but they still left that feature in because they built it. So you have a client router. So the same app can either turn on or not turn on this feature. And I don't know. I don't think we'll get the answer right now. I've been trying to see what does that mean for performance. Like the experience is entirely the same. But what you get is if you go from one templated page to another very similarly templated page, you're on a site, you're on article 1, you go to article 2, you really don't have to throw everything away and reparse all style sheets and reset up all polyfills and rerun whatever frameworks. You could just sort of swap the few pieces in. So I suspect it's like a better Ahref link default for a lot of sites. And we could get data already with how that's working, and that's no difference for developer experience. And you could just build that one feature in potentially.
Yeah, I did read some of the developer feedback about this, and part of it is that, for example, some third-party libraries are not accustomed to this kind of
Persistent
thing, and like server side is still a bit difficult to do like just right with this. And if we integrated something like this into the platform, we'll get to the same issues.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry, you're suggesting the thing, Michael. You're suggesting the that it would replace the body.
Yes.
And keep all the scripts.
Yeah. So the way it works, and Noam hinted at
that would
this.
be a thing that could be added as a primitive.
Right. Like you could, maybe it's an opt-in, like every anchor tag could opt in to this type of link would be a swap link as opposed to a navigate link or something, or just run an experiment where periodically we just try to do it and see what breaks.
I think that could be very interesting. So basically, for Shopify, so we have storefronts. They have a lot of pages. They are an MPA. There is some pressure that I'm currently fending off of moving more of that to an SPA architecture, or some of the interactions to be partial navigations in order to get better smoothness in between navigations. And even when we are, like, even when prefetching the next page, we still see a visible lag when doing MPA navigations versus partial navigations where the head remains intact. And
So you're saying you have proof already that that is true?
I don't know if I have proof.
Sure.
I have anecdotal
Total proof. Yeah, good enough.
evidence,
That's proof.
that yes, so there is visible lag in processing HTML and CSS for pages that are very similar. One way of tackling it, which I talked to Uwe about, is maybe we can cache some of the like similar to JavaScript code cache. Maybe we can do some CSS cache or HTML product cache and speed up that work so it won't take 300 milliseconds, but 100, and then it won't be noticeable. Another would be to say we can do that, and we're doing this kind of a swap that would enable us to maintain that. And opt-in at the link level would make it hard for us to enable it at scale, but maybe it's like, I don't know if we can enable it at scale, because there could be some things that rely on, there could theoretically be different code between those different pages, and that is for the, like each store to decide on its own.
Yep.
But it would definitely be an interesting primitive to play with if we think that a caching option
Is not good.
is not good enough, or like the alternative is like pre-rendering makes this go away.
Well, it
Those
doesn't, right? Like the moment of activation, you have a hot swap to the pre-rendered page if the pre-rendered page finished pre-rendering.
Yeah,
But you still pay the full cost of rendering that page.
sure.
So if you could pre-render early enough and infrequently enough, but it doesn't solve some of the UX patterns of like state persistence or UX component persistence.
Sure, this I care less about,
You care less about it.
because I'm already like I have MBAs. I don't have any state persistence.
Yeah, we are out of time.
Oh, no.
Yeah, we're out of time. So thank you all for participating in this, and we can continue this conversation offline. I wanted to get it kind of started, that people would know that there is this conversation, and let's have it.
Yeah, thanks for kicking it off.
Thank you.
Thanks.